right. What's up? What's up? What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Weekly Flow. This week we are looking at, well, let's start. Last week we actually kind of stirred the hornet's nest a little bit, and we've kind of seen this in the Webflow community over the last few weeks. A lot of people talking about Framer and, saying it's a little easier to use. It's got some features that, are better than Webflow in certain instances. And, there's like this a little back and forth on who's the new kid, the real new kid on the block when it comes to web development. We're obviously all in on Webflow here, but we wanted to have a little fair shakedown for what's happening in the world of Framer. So we invited Nandi, who is behind Learn Framer. And we're going to show, let's just go ahead and, this is the view we want, this one here. So yeah, we'll bring in Nandi here. We've also got Colleen in the background. Let's see, we've got the Framer website open here. We've got Content Nest in the background. So we've got Aiva. Oh, and Joshua just joined in the background. Hello. The links to join the video, we'll add, let's see, add to the scene, remove, add to scene. Oh no, why is it not working? Of course. Okay, well, in a second here, I'm going to get everyone in the background scene. So we'll pull that out. But there's ways to join in video. You can join the Twitter Spaces. You can obviously join in the YouTube chat. And we're going to have a very interactive discussion today about all of this. As usual, we get started. Let me just pull that up here. We'll get rid of the phone. A couple events coming up. We have Pretoria, South America Webflow chapter is doing an event today. Oh, that has already passed. Sorry, we missed it. Friendback Cafe is happening this afternoon. That's Devin Fontaine, part of the Flow Party, 2 p.m. Inicia tu carrera en desarrollo web sin programar. So that's in Spanish. Webflow meetup group. It's
also in English too.
Oh, also
they're doing
in English.
Dual language.
Duo language, right on. Okay, let's see. 3 tips on how to use Webflow interactions better. That's hosted by Webflow. That's happening tomorrow. Build and Bond. That's April 7th. N2TF hangs. This is just, you should get used to coming back to this. So go bookmark stateofflow.io. This is going to become your Webflow community dashboard. You can always find the live streams here. Upcoming Webflow events will be featured on the page here. If you didn't see, what's the link? I just bookmarked it, but I don't have it up. Where is it? Webflow, host an event. Webflow is also doing some stuff with the community too here. So they just relaunched their global community leaders initiative. So if you're interested in that, you can go to webflow.com/community. And I think maybe we'll share, or in the email and in the YouTube description, Colleen, we can get maybe that stuff in there. So that's kind of the kicker for the community stuff. We're going to get right into this chat here. So let's take a quick second and have Nandi say hello. He's over at Learn Framer on Twitter. So Nandi, just say what's up. Where'd you get started with Framer? Just give us a little intro to yourself real quick, and we'll then explain a quick little outline of how this is going to go down.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me, guys. My name is Nandi. As you guys know, I'm building Framer University. I came across Framer last year during my summer vacation, I think, and I still remember the moment when I learned about Framer, because I was pretty shocked, and I immediately know that I wanted to do something with it. I wanted to build some kind of project around it, so that's how Framer University was born. And yeah, since then I'm building Framer University. No, actually, I started this January. So, I was playing around with Framer for a couple of months, and then I started building it because, I really believe in, Framer and yeah.
Yeah, and it has a lot of the same types of vibes of seeing that I see people get excited for about Webflow, right? These beautiful, interactive, dynamic websites, and we see the video chats filling up. The links, again, are in the YouTube description, but we're going to hide that just for a second. Okay, so yeah, lots of stuff that I see people doing in Framer that I also saw people getting excited about in the world of Webflow. So, let's just kind of start looking at, what has you excited about Framer? What do you see as the value here? Obviously, getting online in a simple way. And let us know in the comments, what are your thoughts? Like, are you in Webflow and are you excited about Framer? Are you interested to just learn more? What questions do you have for Nandi? He's a Framer expert. And so what would you like to know about Framer as it relates to Webflow? Let's use this as an opportunity to just kind of go back and forth. Nandi and I, there's no interest in who's the best platform, right? So this isn't Webflow against Framer. This is about what's the right tool for the project you're trying to do? How do you pick that tool? How do you decide, which is the right tool? And I think as we get into this, the complexity is going to come out with the larger type websites. And maybe I'm completely wrong, right? I'm completely open to the idea that I'm absolutely wrong about everything, and that I may come out of this being a big Framer fan. So I'm open to all of that. So Nandi, tell me a little bit about like what's going on in the world of Framer. Why are you excited about this platform? How did you get started in this world of Framer? Let's start with that, and then we'll just do like a quick overview of like Framer itself. We'll look at their website a little bit here.
Okay, so personally, I was using Figma before Framer. I was creating UI designs with Figma, and yeah, I was very familiar with Figma. I was using auto layout and stuff like that, but I knew that whenever I wanted to create a website, I had to do the design in Figma, and then maybe send it for a developer to develop it, or maybe I had to develop it on maybe Webflow, or maybe I could also code it. And when I came across Framer, the main thing that stood out to me is that I can create websites in a similar environment like Figma. So if I know Figma and I know auto layout, I can jump in Framer and I can start creating websites. And I don't have to learn any complex new features or new things. I could just jump in Framer and do the same things I would do in Figma, and then at the end, I wouldn't have a PNG that I have to send or a prototype that I have to send for developer, but I have a live working website on the internet. So that was the main thing that really stood out to me, and to this day, I still think that that's the most important thing about Framer, is that designers who already know Figma can just jump into Framer and create their own websites without learning any extra huge things.
Can I just stop for 1 second and talk like I'm listening to you and you sound like me when I was first learning Webflow. So I just want to point out that the core purpose of all of these tools is the same thing. It's empowering, and I've talked about this, that this is the real glue that holds this community together. It's not like one particular tool. It is the empowerment of the ability to build beautiful things on a digital canvas in like whatever way makes sense to you, to be able to express the ideas that are inside of your head out into the real world, right? Without having the complexity of code between you and that output. Like that's it. Right. So everything else that happens in the space, your particular tool to do that with, I really think is going to be inconsequential in the long term. So Nandi, I just wanted to be clear, like we're so far like in perfect alignment on why you got into it and the value proposition I think that Framer and Webflow also make. I think where we run into even some of the issues is like with the full potential, right? To me, Webflow is like a one-to-one attempt, an attempt to abstract HTML and CSS on a one-to-one basis, right? So if you're in Webflow, you kind of have to understand the basics of these web technologies, right? HTML, CSS, JavaScript, positioning, how they work, the box model, etc. Is that the same with Framer? Do they abstract some of that away? I guess that's maybe like the core place to start, because it seems like maybe Framer is abstracting some of that stuff one layer more away from the user, which simplifies things and is maybe why people find a lot of value in it. But I think if we really start tugging at this string, what we'll find is that it's inside of that complexity that Webflow has, that I think they're so far ahead of anybody else, that where they find the real advantage. Am I wrong in that? Does anybody else have thoughts about that? And again, this is open to comments, questions from Twitter Spaces and the background here. So Nandi, I'll send it to you first.
Yeah, I also agree with that. So I think Webflow is closer to HTML and CSS. So if you want to get started with Webflow, for example, you need to learn how CSS works, how HTML works, because basically how classes work. That's how you can get started with Webflow. You won't write code, but you will still somewhat do code just in a visual way. And I think Framer is closer to the things that designers already know. As I said, for example, Figma, because they have the interface that are pretty much similar to Figma. And that's why I think many designers get started with it. So, for example, just my experience, I wanted to learn Webflow because I wanted to create websites and I didn't want to code. So I started watching videos about Webflow, but at the end of the day, I didn't get started with it because I just felt like it's it would need a bit more time than I could allocate to it. But when I came across Framer, it was so much easier for me to get started with it. And in the end of the day, I got started with it. So I think many designers are in the same position as me, and that's why they might not get started with Webflow, but get started with Framer. Sorry.
Yeah, this is the one I wanted to go. This is interesting to me because I've talked about this a number of times that I still think, and this is I think what Corey was trying to get at last week in his, if you saw the little short, the clip, was that Framer is a kind of a lower barrier to entry. It's more of that DIY tool. Here's the other thing, right? If you're going to make a career out of building websites, you might want to learn Webflow. But if you just want to stand up a website real quick for your startup, or if you just want to like build something on your personal site and you don't want to have to go into that deep end because you're not trying to make a career out of building websites for other people, you just need to, again, build your thing. Those are two totally different use cases, And I think, again, like the barrier to entry for Webflow is really high. We have to be honest that it is almost learning to code just in a visual canvas, whereas some of these other tools, again, abstract that complexity. And I think, I don't know if anybody else has other thoughts there, but I think that's kind of, I would take that away as the premise of the differences here. Does anybody have any major disagreements with that?
Interesting perspective on this because I have the same background as Nandi. I think I'm pronouncing it right, but my background is in design, Figma, Illustrator, whatever, and I actually learned rudimentary code through using Webflow. So I did not learn HTML and CSS pretty much at all. I just started using Webflow and I started digging into people's projects because there's a lot of public projects, and I actually learned a lot about code through that. So I kind of had like a backwards approach. But my main question, as someone who hasn't used Framer a lot, I think that you can use both, right, for different things. But my main question for you would be, have you hit any limitations with Framer that you think Webflow would be able to handle? Like, have you found any like borders that you really can't quite get past? Because that's where I really get interested. And Raymar, let me know if that's an interesting topic. But I think that's what I want to know is like, where's the limit?
Yeah.
Yep.
I'd be interested in that too. I think that's often the conversation, right? Where do we run into these limits? So Nandi, I'll send that to you.
Yeah, there's definitely a limit at the moment in Framer. At the moment, you can definitely do more with Webflow. So in Framer, you don't really have any, complex logic or anything like that. So, but I always emphasize that at the moment. So I don't know. I feel like Framer is improving in a really fast pace, and I think they will soon catch up to these functionalities. And yeah, then we will have two tools that are basically capable of the same things, but they approach the whole thing differently. So yeah, but at the moment there is definitely a limitation in Framer, and I wouldn't recommend it for huge and complex websites. I would rather recommend it for smaller marketing sites or portfolio sites. But as you guys can see, the framer.com is also built with Framer, so you can also do bigger or more complex things with it.
Is the CMS a limitation?
Yeah, hang on. We're not going to get into. Let's not get into the deep into the weeds on that stuff yet. I think I think also you could think about Framer in like where Webflow was in their earlier days, right? If you think about Webflow when it started, it was just a landing page builder, right? It wasn't this crazy complicated thing that it is today. They've kind of had a decade, right? This is their 10th year in business. They have now become a fully mature product Where I think Framer is more in that scrappy, you're just kind of building, they're just learning what kind of product they're going to be too, which again gives them a lot of potential. Just like 10 years ago, Webflow was a big disruptive idea because WordPress was like the only player in the room. And now WordPress is still the gorilla in the room, right? They're the elephant in the room, but there's all these other little like, almost gnats, right? Because we looked at the size of them in the scale. WordPress is, what was it, like 40 something percent of the market, and Webflow is like 0.06% of the market. Framer's not even on that chart yet. So if you go back to that show a couple weeks back that we did a comparison about the size of the market, how big will Webflow get? And so there's all these other little companies now kind of floating around trying to be that next, thing. And we wanted to just do this comparison series. So I think we're going to jump around and I wanted to go to you because you kind of throw the first, the first blow here, I think, in your comment saying you dislike it from a development standpoint. Share what you think is like a limitation there. You say as a developer, it's a bit painful. And I think Nandi just said that, right? So like there are some limitations from building big sites. Even in Webflow, you're not going to build e-commerce. You're still going to go to Shopify for that, or you're going to go to WooCommerce. So, Acute, I'd be interested to know, was this something that like was just you personally, you couldn't run into it, or was it a client request, or what are you saying here from a developer standpoint that was difficult?
So I was basically helping out a friend, and for example, you gave the example of the Framer homepage, right? And then you see basically the navigation, how you, for example, have these drop downs, and you have always different categories, and how it's like fixed to the screen width. For example, when you work with Framer, when you're inside of a component, you cannot, for example, then select a position fixed. And basically, the issue with Framer is they have a lot of limitations on, for example, what you can do with CSS or what you can do with a certain layout and all of these things. And then the other issue is Webflow under the hood works with HTML, CSS, but Framer under the hood works with React. And that means, for example, let's say in Webflow, we can write a small custom code snippet to ease, let's say, a certain thing, which is really, which is not possible in Webflow. You cannot do that easily with Framer. Yes, you have custom code components, but let's say you need to have an interaction between two components, then both of them have to be custom code entirely, and you cannot have like non-custom code segments. It's
okay,
basically...
I'm gonna jump in here. I think I hear you. I don't think that's a real problem. I think that's somebody trying to use the wrong platform for the wrong job, right?
Oh, okay, I agree with that.
Yeah, if you're trying to like force things in, that's like trying to do, build a web. Like if you're trying to build a full web app and you're trying to use Webflow, it's probably the wrong tech unless you're trying to build a very simple app at this point, right? Same thing with e-commerce. Unless you're trying to build a very simple e-commerce store, you'll find yourself trying to do other things. So what it sounds like you were trying to force Framer to do something it's not really intended to do, and it's not something they market at. Am I right in that, Nandi?
Yeah, definitely.
Would it make sense to maybe talk a few minutes about maybe what types of sites are a great fit for Framer or good use cases?
Yeah, let's do that. I think that could be good. I
certainly found when I was looking at the pricing page, some of that very enlightening in terms of like collections and how much data, and like the pricing model of if you are just kind of starting out and needing a small site, a landing page. Let's say you are starting up let's say you're an indie builder and you're looking to do a wait list. It looks like this is a very great entry point to be able to have a professional site, to be able to be collecting data to go to your email list and those types of things. If you're maybe a local restaurant or a food truck or just a local business, when I was going in and just sort of playing with some of the pieces that were there for drag and drop, it just seemed like there was a lot of things that were just very visually intuitive. We've talked a couple of times on past streams about sort of drag and drop, and is Webflow ever going to necessarily be a drag and drop editor? That was one of the things that struck me when I was kind of playing a little bit with Framer. But I think I guess as I was looking at the pricing, some of the types of projects that we talk about in this space and on this stream, I don't know that I saw that fit with Framer, but I'm not really sure where that middle line is of when you maybe might want to cross from Framer to Webflow.
Yeah, that's a good question there.
Yeah, so personally, I would use Framer for smaller sites. So for example, if a designer wants to build a portfolio for himself, or a small marketing website for maybe a new product that you're launching. I think for that use case, Framer is perfectly enough. And then if you want to do this as a business, so you want to create websites for clients, you can definitely do that with Framer. So you can, for example, niche down and you say that you only accept marketing websites or smaller websites, and you just do those. So you don't have to be like a full stack developer who does everything from e-commerce to marketing websites. You can say that you are creating websites for maybe different products as marketing websites, or I even created landing pages for like agencies and stuff like that. So for that, Framer is perfectly enough. And as I said, if you want to build a business around it, you definitely can. You just have to niche down and don't accept projects that are basically out of the limitations of the Framer.
This is, I think, a good place to even talk a little bit about that, because I think a lot of times we see these enterprise clients and we see these $100,000 website builds or $50,000, $60,000, $80,000 website builds, and everybody's like, I want to drive the Ferrari, right? But most people in this industry are selling a couple $1,000 websites. They're selling the $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, $10,000 websites, right? Like in that range, you can make a great living building very simple, very performant, like just splash pages, landing pages, marketing top of funnels, a little subscription page, a little whatever it is, a little launch page for something. And that, like, don't think that, like, if you're out here and you're looking at this stuff and you're thinking like, I'm going to go all in on Webflow. Maybe you are because you want to like make a career out of building websites, like we talked about a little earlier. But if like complex, big, you want to grow and kind of evolve in that industry. But you could start out with a tool like this. I remember my first Webflow sites or my first WordPress sites were not much fancier than that. And I was just using like this one WordPress theme. I had literally like one WordPress theme that I was familiar with, and I could build all sorts of stuff as long as I could build it with that theme, And so you got real used to talking to clients and figuring out, how do I find the people that need this type of site, like Nandi was saying there, and you just kind of focus the thing you're trying to build into that specific niche. So don't sleep on that as a business model. Like not everyone has to go after the crazy big wild sites. There's a huge market. And if you look at these, like I see beautiful sites here all over. I haven't obviously opened them all up, but from a design standpoint, if you can customize some of these things, I mean, this is like the design world criticizing Canva, and then Canva slowly creeping and doing all this stuff. And then everyone in marketing or in whatever that's doing like really low level marketing and design work, and they don't have access to a full-time designer, is just in Canva firing things off like bang, 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 bang. And sure, you could still hire the big agency and you could still do the big splash page. You can still do the big thing. However, the day-to-day, the little churn and burn stuff, the little quick thing that you don't have time to give it the full, that goes over here. And so that's where I guess if you're coming and dividing and figuring out like where the path may go, it's really gets down to that scoping the project, right?
Yep.
Nice.
Really do appreciate it, Joshua. Thanks a lot.
Let's go into some of these. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just go ahead.
Oh, you know what? I gotta remember that the guest scene needs to be visible for the audience to hear your audio. So if you could, and you're in the background in the video room, just raise your hand, and then we'll bring you in into the conversation. That way, the remote audience can also listen in on that. Okay, let's go into the comments here. Joel Whitaker is saying, it's interesting because from a design perspective, Framer has a low barrier to entry. When it comes to coding front end, Framer is miles ahead because it supports React components in the editor. So what you were saying, Acute, earlier, somebody else sees as a potential benefit here because it gives them the potential to use those React elements in the actual interface itself. So Joel, I'd be interested if you have any other take on that. Let's go through and see what else is coming in from these comments here. Let's see, Zach, what's up in the house? Let's see, I tried Framer for a little bit just to see what it was like, and I didn't find it particularly easy. Yes, easier than Webflow, but still a learning curve. I think that's going to be the case for all of these, though. You know, I mean, any tool is going to have a learning curve. And I think also a lot of people that may be coming from Framer and then look at Webflow and see the complexity are like, oh my God, what is that? Right? I had some guy on Twitter telling me that Webflow had no taste. And I didn't understand what that meant, but it was about the complexity. And I think Webflow's got an infinite amount of complexity because it is just HTML, CSS. You can kind of break some of the stuff. Nandi, that's a good question. When I'm working in Framer, can I break the responsiveness, or are those kind of elements baked in? Like if I make a hero section, do I have to then, you know, always figure out the responsiveness, or are some of those sections kind of auto, you know, responding and kind of doing some of that responsiveness for me?
No, you have to do everything yourself. So it's basically like auto layout in Figma. So you have to, you know, you can create stacks, which are basically the same as auto layout in Figma. And you can set the stack direction, you can set the alignment, you can set the gap, and you can basically set anything. And that's how you make something responsive in Framer. So there's nothing like, you know, you don't really get anything automatically. You have to do everything by hand.
Got it. And that's another big difference between like the Squarespaces of the world, the Wixes of the world. Actually, I think next week we're going to have somebody from Wix continue the conversation here. So this week's Framer, I think next week we're talking to somebody from Wix. The week after that, we're doing this community all hands meeting, which I recommend everyone be at. We're going to make some cool announcements leading into the Global Open House. The Global Open House is coming up May 16th, so shameless plug for that. What about forms, Nandi? Forms inside of Framer. Does Framer allow any kind of form handling? This is David H is saying, Framer forms, why can't we create native forms in Framer? I was surprised that Form Spark integration only allows 3 fields. So what's up with forms in Framer?
Yeah, forms are definitely a thing, which is also another limitation in Framer. Unfortunately, you cannot natively do forms in Framer at the moment. I hope they soon give us the ability to do that. But at the moment, you can only integrate third-party services like FormSpark or basically any other form service. I personally use FormSpark because I feel like that's perfect enough for me. But I know that there are some use cases where you need, you know, more fields and stuff like that. And if you need that, there is definitely a limitation that you run into.
Yeah, let's see. And I think so. Even in WordPress, like WordPress doesn't handle forms well. WordPress has a huge plugin ecosystem of form builders, right? There's people making lots and lots and lots of money handling forms in WordPress. Webflow has forms because they needed to have forms, just like they have e-commerce, but it's not like e-commerce you'd use if you were really trying to build a very complex store. Same way you wouldn't use Webflow forms to build very complex forms, right? If you wanted to build a simple, you know, couple input form, a real simple form, like you can do that right now. And I'm sure their form builder is going to get, you know, much better as they evolve, but I wouldn't really hold that as like a you know, like a big negative right now. I don't know if anybody has thoughts on that.
Yep.
Let's see. Dale is saying, for me, it makes sense to continue developing my Webflow knowledge before I attempt to learn Framer. Framer's on the list of 2-3 programs I'd actually like. Yeah. If you can use Webflow, I'm not sure there's a big, you know, like need for Framer unless it is for those simple, smaller sites, right? Nandi, what would you say to that?
For me, it's different because I was using Figma and I was really, you know, familiar with Figma, and I don't know, I just feel like using Framer is more fun than using Webflow. And I say that and I didn't use Webflow, so I didn't get started with it, but I feel like, and I also heard it from other people that, you know, creating websites with Framer is fun because you can design the website in a freeform canvas. You can see the breakpoints right next to each other. You can go back and forth, and I don't know. It's just a better experience, and that's why I would never, you know, go and use Webflow even if I can use it. Maybe if, you know, I want to do something more complex, then, you know, I only have Webflow, so I need to do it. But I don't take on projects that are that complex, so I don't really have to go and use Webflow, and I can stay with Framer. And I'm gonna stay with Framer because, as I said, as a designer, it's such a different experience to to make a website in that kind of environment.
So Nandi, your goal kind of is to just be kind of like in that niche. You're, not really aspiring to scale out of that. Like what happens if you are, like, let's say in the middle of a design project and somebody comes to you with a request that, maybe is a late addition, and then Framer doesn't have the capacity to build out of that? Or like how do you handle that with clients? Or how do you protect yourself from some of that stuff?
Yeah. So at the moment, I don't really do many client projects. Maybe in the future I'm gonna do more, but at the moment I'm focusing on the education part and building out the course. But I think when you start a client project and you want to develop it with Framer, you have to be really clear about the limitations, and really like explain it clearly to the client what are the different limitations, so you don't jump into a project that might potentially need something more complex in the future. So I think that's the best thing that you can do.
Yeah. Isabel has a really good point here, saying if both have a steep learning curve and you're going to dedicate the time to learn one, why not go for the one that has much more capabilities? That's a good question. But I guess it just depends on, again, what you are maybe trying to do. Nandi, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think they both have a learning curve, but they are not the same. So as I said, I was really familiar with Figma, familiar with auto layout, and I could jump in Framer and do websites. I just watched a couple of YouTube tutorials on the Framer YouTube channel, and I was pretty much good to go. And I didn't have to, learn it for weeks and weeks. It was just a couple of days, and I could get started with it. So you definitely have to learn a couple of things when you get started with a new software. But as I said, Figma, Framer, pretty familiar. So if you know Figma, you can really easily pick up Framer and do websites with that.
Yeah, let's hang on. We got a bunch of stuff coming in from the crowd here too. So what's up, Noah in the house? Arthur Gostick, hello, Fernando. Acute, you had a comment you wanted to make slowly but also quickly.
Yeah. So generally, when you come from Framer, from a design world, from Figma, from a design world, then in my opinion, Framer is the better tool to start with, because when comparing the barrier to entry, as we already said, Framer is much lower to enter it, and once you got the hang out of it, you also move much faster than with Webflow. The reason is Framer cuts a lot of these additional things away. Like, for example, in Framer, you don't have class names. So when you style elements, you always style the element directly. So that is already simpler. You have, for example, also less positions. The units are more limited. And generally, because everything is either a flexbox or a grid, it's much easier to work with. So basically, let's say you have learned Webflow and Framer, on this you have to do a lot of simple websites, then I would stick with Webflow. But if you, let's say, are someone who just learned, who is basically just fluently in Figma, then I would first recommend to learn Framer to basically learn a bit already about website development, and see if that's enough. If not, I would then go a level up to Webflow, because Webflow definitely takes much more time to learn, but it gives you also more possibilities.
Yeah, very well said. Nandi, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I agree with that. So if you are familiar with Figma, I would also recommend to just get started with Framer and see if that's enough for you. And if not, you can definitely go up to Webflow and learn it too. But I think the easiest path for someone who's like really knows Figma, knows how to layout, just get started with Framer in 1-2 days, and you can create your websites super easily. And then if you need more complex things, just learn Webflow.
Yeah. Noah's saying it's not just about capabilities, it's about workflow and efficiencies. I think, again, we're going to keep coming back to that, right? If you're trying to build something at scale, if you're trying to build something complex, Right? Like I don't know how many agencies or enterprises are considering building with Framer. But if you've got your little startup, if you're a little, build in public tinkerer and you're just a marketer and you just want to get something stood up, if like they have this infinite canvas. So if you're used to dealing with like Photoshop or Figma or some of these canvases where you can pinch and zoom and kind of get into the design, some of those things are, like you can do in Framer that you can't do in other sites. And you can see, I think, the mobile view along with the desktop view. And so there are some kind of cool features that I think some of these other tools could learn from. I don't know where Webflow would put it on the canvas if you could see the multiple views and pinching in and out. So here's the thing. Here's what you always have to go back to. Webflow is kind of boxed in by what you can do with HTML and CSS because they are, again, a one-to-one abstraction on an actual software language, right? Like on the front end language of the internet. So they are, right, restricted by some of that. And so the reason they give you this like live preview and resemble a browser is because they're trying to keep it to that, to CSL, HTML, or CSS, HTML, what you can do in the browser. Once you abstract some of that away, once you bring in React in the back end and you can use that, because I don't know what Framer's doing inside of their designer, but it looks like with the pinch and zoom stuff, there's some different stuff than just trying to replicate what the browser is. Like there's a lot of different things happening. And so again, as you abstract away global classes, like Acute mentioned, like as you abstract away some of these positioning models and how CSS works, you can do some interesting things, but you, again, start handcuffing the potential of the site. Nandi, did I get any of that wrong?
Oh yeah. I want to add something here. So we have to notice that. So for example, there are many big startups that are building on Framer too. So you don't necessarily have to have like a small startup to get started with Framer. It's more about the what you need. So if you need something that is doable with Framer, then you can perfectly do it with Framer. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to say.
Yeah, Versoli's asking which big startups. Do you know any names of the? I mean, I guess they got some big names here coming across the Zapier, Lottie Files. Now, here's another thing too. I know are these positioning statements from these companies? Are they because I know is like Lottie Files all their websites, or is like did they build a landing page with Framer? Those are the questions that I would ask, right? Like, did these companies actually like move their core site to this property, or did like some marketing team build a campaign and like part of something that's owned by that brand? And I see you going a little nuts back there. What's up? Let's send it to you.
Yeah, so where I'm gonna go with this marketing. So before, Nandi, you mentioned about limitations, and you have to understand that the site will have limits while picking Framer. So I wanted to kind of add on what just Raymar said is I tested Framer so in depth for SEO and content and marketing needs, and it seems like if you're planning to update or improve the site at any point, it still doesn't have that capability, as CMSs don't nest into each other, and there's a lot of like fundamental marketing things missing, like which can be seen even on Framer's site itself, like lack of internal linking and a lot of kind of basic fundamental things, not even talking about heading structure errors and things like that. So, like, would you say teams that take over Framer sites, like, do you have like the experience of a marketing team or the startup, as you mentioned, big startups or whatever, how they take over the site, and how does that kind of workflow look after the site is done? Because there's two ways, like you can think
All right.
about it. Either the website is never done, or with Framer, it seems like it's done, right? So how do you like respond to that marketing part of how does this work?
So because I wasn't part of any of these trans conversions or like going to Framer as a big startup, I don't know how they handle it, but as I said, it has some limitations. As you said, you cannot nest CMS collections. That's of course a limitation. But I always come back to the fact that Framer is relatively new, so they're just starting out, figuring out what they want to do, and there are definitely new things coming along to the software, new functionalities, and these missing features that you say are pretty fundamental and basic will definitely come into the Framer. So I wouldn't worry about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to say, I'm sorry. Was that Colleen?
I was just gonna say, we've talked a couple of times about workflow a little bit on this. I'd be kind of curious, maybe we could, at some point, maybe we could talk a little bit about, if you are getting ready to do a site, like what is that typical workflow within Framer?
Hang
just
on.
to sort of a,
Yeah, let's not shift gears just for a second. I want to go into some of these comments here I want to stay on that topic that we were just on here. Let's see what just happened. I think I just opened up Shane's profile. Shane was saying, despite the differences, the no-code space is growing and there's clearly demand for these tools. Webflow has been proving the concept and Framer's jumping on the train. I totally get. Oh, are my comments not playing nice now? Oh, there they go. There they go. Yeah, I totally get that. And Colleen, we'll come back to that. So save that thought. But I get that. And then I think Noah follows up here. He goes, Webflow user primarily. However, the nice thing about Framers, it's new. The team is rapidly adding features and capabilities without any tech debt. Noah, I know you've been through this. Webflow was like that too. Remember every day logging into that site and being like, oh my God, look at this little goodie, another little thing, another little thing, another little thing. And then all of a sudden you inherit all that tech debt. And then you're like, oh crap, we've grown so big. Now we need to outgrow our 10,000 item database limit, and almost like a freeze in like major feature updates until they figure out how to basically rebuild the back end and refactor the whole app so that they can add these big functionality and make those stair-step increases. So again, WordPress started as a blogging platform that became this crazy website builder tool, and it's doing website building pretty bad, at scale, but it's still a great CMS and it's being used for a lot of different things, right? Webflow was like the first beautiful page builder type thing that was also attached to a CMS, and now they're kind of breaking through their little thing. Who knows where they're going to go? And I think Framer's kind of facing that same thing, but they can't solve for that right now. I think there's a very clear market for them to just build these tools that allow people to build simple websites and get moving fast, like Nandi's been saying, right? This kind of niche. Who said it the other day about the local market on Twitter? Who made that little comment? And I replied back with some like graphic saying like, oh, Jesse Neiman was talking about your local market, right? If you're looking for small business websites for different things, like if you're just hustling, if you're like, you got some design skills and you just want to go out there and start selling websites, like you could be young, you could be in high school, you don't have to learn a bunch of, you just go and start selling and building little things. Like there's so much web to be built over the next few years, like I don't know, I wouldn't dismiss any of them for anything, or Noah kind of dismiss the fact that they don't have the tech debt now to mean that they won't have that in the future, or that they won't hit some of these same roadblocks as they try to now add some complexity. Because I can imagine at some point the Framer people will be like, hey, I want to do this bigger feature, I want to do this thing, and Framer will have to be re-architected at a certain level to allow for that. So anybody have thoughts on that? Josh, I see your hand raised. Is it related to this here, or?
Yeah, it is. It
Cool.
is. I just, throughout this past few minutes of conversation, it's like, can it handle the complex CMS, or can it do this, or is it good for marketing? And I think the answer is it's good for what it's good for now. And the fact that it lets people go from idea to actual site as quickly as it does makes it useful. It's not going to be everything for everyone. I think that's okay, and we should still like accept it for what it is and be okay with that.
Yeah, Isabel brings up a good point, and this was also very common a question in the world of Webflow for a long time. I don't think people ask it so much anymore because it is so well established, but I'd worry, where did it go? I just lost it. I'd worry I'd have building a client website in Framer that it's not super established software, whether it's going to survive the competitive website builder market. Do you ever worry about that, Nandi? That, the platform itself might disappear or get bought up by somebody? I mean, maybe Canva comes in and scoops up Framer. I don't know if that's a real case, but I remember early on in the Webflow days, we always used to ask this of Vlad, like, hey, what happens if somebody buys you? Or what happens if you go out of business? Or, that was one of my big concerns. Like, I'm moving all of my WordPress business and my agency business and blah, blah, blah. We're going all in on this. what happens if the platform disappears? Is that something that comes up in the Framer community at all?
Yeah, like I think these are definitely real possibilities. But as I like to think about these things, so for example, when I want to travel to a new country and I have to take the airplane, I'm not thinking about that it might crash and I might die. I just go because the upside is so much better than the downside. And I think the same thing applies to Framer. So I really like the software. I really enjoy it. I really like using it. And I really believe in it. So I'm gonna use it. I'm not gonna, think about too much about these, worst case scenarios. Yes, they might happen, and if they happen, then it happens. So, yeah, as I said, I think the upside is just much better than the downside. So
I'm
yeah,
gonna
but definitely real possibility.
I want to
So,
build on your analogy a little bit because it's a good analogy, but I don't think you took it far enough. Like,
Yeah.
it's like going to a country and not getting on the airplane because the presidential election in the country, which is 3 years from now, might elect somebody you don't care for, right? It's like you could still fly to the country and then spend some time there and then decide whether any of that matters down the road. And if you're a designer trying to get into the web development space, what do you care about all those other things, right? If you just want to go start building and tinkering with the web, the easiest, fastest way to do that is going to be whatever path you find. And sometimes that's not Webflow. As much as we love Webflow, as powerful as Webflow is, this is not a knock on Webflow, right? It even says it right here on the Framer's website, Framer first Webflow. Webflow is a web builder that relies on a lot of HTML and CSS knowledge like classes. With Framer, the experience of building a website is very similar to the design workflow you're likely used to with Figma or Sketch, with added features and to make responsive, high-performing websites. Webflow is a great tool, and there are some things we would recommend them over Framer, like e-commerce capabilities, a no-code membership layer, advanced logic. But there you have it, right? And so just because you're going to go visit a country doesn't mean you're going to go move to the country or that you're going to buy a house in the country or that you're going to change your citizenship. It may just mean that you want to know what it's like to travel to different parts of the world and explore what the landscape is like outside of where you might live. So if you live in Webflow, it's important to kind of go and explore some of these tools. And I guarantee you, Webflow, it's on their radar too, right? I bet they have people internally that are looking at all these tools and figuring out what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, what they might do different. Yeah, I don't know. Let's go back to the comments. And Colleen, let's go back to your point. I'm sorry, if you would recenter us because I lost the thought.
No. I mean, this is an informal, free-flowing conversation. That's what makes these fun. So, kind of a little bit throughout this conversation, we've been talking a bit about workflows. Like with the client handoff. How does that go? How does it go with the maintaining? And so I just was curious. We haven't really necessarily talked a little bit about if you're sitting down to do a site in Framer, what is that workflow? What is it that first thing that you do or start with, or are there templates? Are there components? Maybe just how do you go from blank page, from opening up that Framer project to having that website? Can you maybe talk us through a little bit?
Yep, definitely. So you have basically two ways. You can either go into Figma and do the design there and then import it with their plugin to Framer. But what I usually like to do is just start with Framer because, as I said, they are basically the same thing. So usually I just start with Framer, and I don't know, there are not really any big complex things. You just do a website like you would do in Figma. So you draw frames, do text, and that's it. You have to be really clever about creating components right from the beginning. At least that's what I like to do, because that's how you can build bigger and more scalable things. So for example, when I create a navigation, I immediately turn it into a component, so I reuse it on different pages. So yeah, you can also start with templates. There are many templates that are really high quality in the Framer community. There are also, if you hit I on your keyboard in the Framer You can pull up the insert menu where you can find different pre-built sections. You can also start with those. And there are also a couple of component libraries that you can use that have pre-built components with different responsive layouts. So you can also start with those.
Nice. Yeah, and if you're watching, we're in the Webflow, in the Framer backend right now, kind of watching some videos, some of their instructional videos here that were walking us through the interface a little bit. And so we're getting a deep dive. If you're listening on the Twitter Spaces and you want to ask Nandi a question, if you have a specific question about Webflow or Framer or how they compare any of the specific features, I'm not sure how much more quiet time we will get here. Again, there's construction happening outside, so they're on lunch break, but we might have 10, 15-ish more minutes to chat. So if you're in the Twitter space and you'd like to chat, you can feel free to request to speak and we'll bring you up. If you're, Aiva, Joshua, or Acute, and you'd like to jump in the background there, those links are in the YouTube description. Or if you guys have any other thoughts, otherwise we can jump into some of the comments here if anything else is coming in. Does anybody have any questions for Nandi there?
I can follow up on the workflow question with, are you familiar with Reloom for Webflow? And do you know if there's anything similar for Framer for maybe Webflow people who are heavily dependent on using Reloom as part of their workflow? Do you know if there's anything similar like that for Framer?
No, actually I'm not familiar with Reloom. What's that?
Reloom is
So it's like a component library.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I said there are a couple of component libraries for Framer. I don't know if they are exactly like Reloom. I'm not sure.
Sure.
But there are definitely component libraries that you can buy and start building with those.
Do you find that is like useful in your workflow, or would you rather just go in with a blank page? Just curious.
No, I like going with blank pages. So even if when I was working with Figma, I never used these, I don't know, design systems or pre-built components like Untitled UI or stuff like that. I liked building everything from scratch. So that's what I do when I work with Framer. Maybe I do components for myself that I reuse in different projects, but I never used these third-party component libraries.
Let's go through the rest of this Framer Webflow comparison page that they built. So we're on the Framer website, and a Webflow alternative that takes no-code web development to the next level. So while Webflow, and this is where you can see, I guess, the theme for the whole conversation here, while Webflow is moving away from the no-code movement, right? Build with the power of code without writing any. So Webflow is moving away now from this no-code positioning. I think because they found out that it was leading them to the wrong path. And we've discussed this countless times. They went all in on trying to be this no-code tool when in reality what they are is a visual coding tool. And now they're reframing their positioning as that and trying to work into that and build out the back end for developers and become the new standard for how you build fully functional front ends on the internet. What Framer looks like they're trying to do is, again, a little bit, they're earlier in where Webflow was in that positioning where it's like, hey, we're in the no-code space. We're easy to build landing pages. We're simpler websites. We're kind of this entry step into building beautiful things on the web. But who knows where that complexity goes over time. So let's look at what the rest they say here. Both Framer and Webflow are capable, powerful professional tools used by thousands of companies. Okay. I would like to know what those numbers actually are. Create custom websites in a visual canvas with no code. Truly collaborative. This is one thing where, Webflow is not great. The collaboration in Webflow is not as great as it could be yet. I think they're getting better at that. Much faster. Let's see. Webflow sites typically start in Figma or Sketch and have to be rebuilt from scratch in Webflow, whereas Framer is kind of that developer tool also. And so they're claiming that that's simpler because you're going right from that design interface to publish. No knowledge of HTML and CSS, so we've covered that. Let's see. If you have a web development background, Webflow concepts like classes might serve you well, but for anyone else, it can quickly become overwhelming. 100%. That's one of the hardest things. That's probably the hardest thing to learn in Webflow is global classes, site structure. how the HTML and CSS should work together to build semantic and proper websites. So Framer's also offering an app, so a desktop app, so you can work offline, which is something that people often ask about in the world of Webflow. They want to kind of work offline. Again, we talked about Webflow. Hang on, I think we talked about Webflow being limited by the HTML and CSS, right? They are the web. So for Webflow, it doesn't make sense to they'd have to build essentially their own browser to be offline, because they are using just the building blocks. So they're trying to be as much of a browser as possible when they go into that preview mode, whereas some of these other tools abstract things away so you can build more easily an offline connection, right? Webflow needs things in their editor that are used in the browser. And so detaching those two things doesn't make a lot of sense, which again leads to the complexity and some of the issues they're dealing with. Let's see. So why are people switching? Sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, I would like to add that you cannot use Framer offline. So yeah,
you cannot use Framer offline?
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
so
you have the app, but you need an internet connection.
So it's a progressive web app just kind of being served natively. Then they've probably just, it's probably like a Electron app or something like that, basically running a modified version of Chromium with no navigation or something like that. Whatever, that's too complicated for anybody here. Okay, what are people switching from Webflow to Framer? No page limits, okay. Page load speed, I'm not sure about that. Webflow pages are pretty freaking fast. SEO for dynamic content. Ooh, Aiva, shots fired. Search engines typically can't index some of your best content. It's generated dynamically with JavaScript, for examples, blah, blah. Framer uses server-side rendering to pre-render your content so Google can index it. Symbols rigidity instead of symbols. Framer builds on smart components with variants. Okay, so global privacy and GDPR compatibility. Oh, that's a big thing. Lots of people do have issues with that, especially our European friends. Truly ISO 27001, I don't know what that is, certified, used by many of the largest tech companies. Okay, well, there you go. That features multi-team organizations, advanced member reporting, advanced security options, custom building and contracts. I think this has to do with like user permissions in the back end of Webflow, who can have access to certain things. So I don't know, I might be talking out of place there, but what if I need something truly custom? Framer allows you to add custom code. If you need drop down to the raw capabilities of the browser, you can easily add custom head snippets or create full-blown React components in code that you and your team can use directly on the canvas, ideal for advanced integrations or dynamic states like login. This is what Joel Whitaker, I think, was talking about earlier as a benefit, not a flaw. So don't take our word for it. Got some Twitter stuff here. Nice. Okay, so that's the gist of at least how they're positioning it as the core differences. Nandi, did I miss anything there, or would you like to add anything that you think is like from your experience?
I think we talked about everything. I really like code components because that really allows you to maybe go a bit further than those limitations. So maybe you run into a limitation, and if you know a bit of code, you can do your own code component and maybe achieve that functionality that you're looking for. So if you scroll through my Twitter page, you see many of these code components. I was sharing, I think the last code component that I was sharing, it was like a countdown component. We did a share button for sharing on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn. We did a download button. So you can do these things, and I really like this about Framer because, as I said, you might run into a limitation, but you can write a code component for it, and you're all right.
When are you launching this Framer University? I see you have like a landing page here. What's your plan for kind of launching this?
So the website will launch, I don't know, in a month or something. I'm just gonna collect all the resources that I create there. I'm gonna also start a YouTube channel, and in the meantime, I'm working on the Framer University course, which will launch in September or October. So that needs some time.
Nice. We just had Kevin pop in here on the Twitter Spaces. Kevin, did you have a question or thought about Framer? All right, going once, twice, Kevin. There he is. Oh, yeah. Kevin just dropped back down to listener, so he rescinded his desire to say something publicly. All right, no big deal. Let's see. Framer also has analytics built in. There you go. So that's something, right?
Nandi, is this Framer University page going to be a paid access?
No, the page itself, so framer.university, you'll be able to access all the free content that I create. So all the tutorials, all the blog posts, all the components, all the remixes that I create, you can access them there. And the Framer University course will be paid, of course, but that will be, I don't know, maybe on a course platform, or I might be building something custom for that. I'm not sure about it yet. But yeah, the course will be paid, and also maybe the templates that I create, those will be also paid. But yeah, the Framer University will be perfectly available for everyone.
Yeah, this to me, and this is like I see this is like a, I don't know. I need to get in here and play with it before I say anything more. But I've seen some Webflow builder or WordPress builders that have some of this kind of functionality. I think we're going to see a bevy of this type of thing. We've got, was it Versoli in the chat here? There's things like Softer that let you take Airtable and just kind of turn it into a website. Notion, is like playing with, web publishing things. I'm telling you, I wouldn't be surprised if Canva at some point comes out and they're like the leading, if they're on the chart. I know they have a web builder, but like, who knows if they're going to come screaming in a way that, nobody's, Canva has a website builder. Yeah, they do. Let's see. Breaking McGuire acquired by Framer University. Zach, I doubt. No. We're going to war on that one. We keeping it all friendly until something like that goes down. Let's see. Isabel is saying, I would be interested to know if Framer interactions are simpler to set up than Webflow. Nandi, I maybe simpler to set up some basic interactions, but then you're also probably handcuffed because you don't have the classes and the customizability, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, I think that's the case. I didn't use Webflow, but I feel like creating interactions in Framer it's pretty easy. But again, there are some limitations to that. So,
Prairie Rookie is saying Flow Cult.
Can I?
Yeah, Acute. What do you got?
So about interactions, I would say, depending on what kind of interactions you do, Framer might be easier. Let's say, for example, you have a grid and you have like a flex layout. In Webflow, it would jump from state 1 to state 2. In Framer, you cannot actually control, like in Webflow, how you transition, but it basically does everything for you. So, for example, you can transition display grid to display flex and other things. And all of that is animated. So basically, in Webflow, you animate like how the entire thing. In Framer, you just define the start state, the end state, and Framer does the rest. But that also has some more limitations, but it's also easier to use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Versoli here is saying. Go ahead. Sorry, Nandi. Go ahead.
So if I want to create an interaction, I usually do create a component. Maybe do 2 or 3 variants inside of that component, and I connect those variants inside of the component, and then I can also change the transition, so I can specify different transition settings, and yeah, that's how you can do interactions in Framer. It's pretty simple.
Yeah. Isabel Edwards saying, I wonder how worried the internal Webflow team is about Framer. I doubt they are. I bet they're watching just to see what the competition is. But they're so far ahead of this state of what you can build. I don't think, and Content Nest is saying Framer's at 3% of the traffic of Webflow. Yeah, so I would say Webflow is probably about as worried as Framer as WordPress is worried about Webflow right now. That doesn't mean it's not a concern. That just means I doubt I doubt anyone's got like a code red. Hey, the competition is nipping at our heels, right? I'm not sure there's anybody that's as sophisticated as Webflow is with just a tool to build HTML, CSS, and JavaScript on the front end visually. Chris, I see we have a Twitter space. Chris Sledge just popped in on the Twitter space. You got a thought?
Yeah, hi. I'm a product designer by day. I just wanted to. I thought this space was really cool. It's something that's top of mind for me. I've followed Framer for a long time. When they used to be more of an origami-like app, like super code heavy, but really powerful and cool. Like for concept car prototyping, it was the bee's knees. But I feel like now they've really lowered the barrier to entry by having an interface that aligns super closely to Figma. So from like a user party of one here, I'm a product designer. I'm very used to Figma, but the learning curve is like super flat. Like it's so easy if you have Figma experience to hop in and just start making stuff. And it's really, for me as a designer, ignited a lot of like inspiration and like creative spark that I think I was missing in Figma. I feel like I have superpowers. That's really cool. I think with Webflow, I've sort of started and stopped a few different times. There is like, you can build more sophisticated things for sure. And I think that is a competitive advantage. But I think the barrier to entry for me as a designer was just too high. It was different enough from the tools I was used to that it was difficult to hop in and just start making stuff. And ultimately, as a designer, that's what I'm trying to do. So I wanted to share those thoughts. I'm also kind of curious. I don't know if anyone from the Webflow team is here, but I'd be really interested to see if a native tool or what am I trying to say? Like an app is on the horizon for Webflow. I don't know if that's something for designers that'd be valuable, but it's something that stuck out to me as super juicy with Framer that's made things super fun and easy to experiment. But yeah, just wanted to share those thoughts, and
Nice.
It's really cool to see this space. And Framer University, I'm a big fan of yours, so really cool to see you here and actually hear what your voice sounds like. That's super exciting.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks.
Nice. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Chris. I think that, yeah, those are good points. I don't think knowing what I know is going to, like, Webflow's not interested in building a native app or an app for the reasons I've talked about before, that they'd essentially have to build a browser. Oh no. Everyone froze on my screen at once, so I thought my computer just crashed. It looks like we're okay. And it does sound like they're starting to grind outside again, so we're going to start winding the conversation down. Any, Akut, I see you got some final thoughts. We'll give it to you, and then we'll go round table just to close up here.
I just forgot my hand up. I have nothing else to say. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. Okay. So I think this has been a great conversation. Like I said, next week I think we're going to have somebody from Wix on. So from their education team, you guys have met Brandon, I think, before. It's not confirmed, but we're trying to lock that in. I've also got someone who used to be a Joomla and Drupal person who is now moving to Webflow with some of their stuff. And so that'll be a really good conversation to have. I think that's going to come like 3 weeks from now. So that'll be the 25th. So if things line up, we've got the next month of content kind of squared up. Again, a reminder that the 18th of this month is going to be a community all hands meeting. So whether you're in the State of Flow community, the Webflow community, Flow parties, No Code North, if you're just starting a meetup, if you just want to get involved with something, whatever, if you're a framer and you're trying to figure out how to like start your own community, come hang out with us. We're doing a big community all hands. We've got some cool, exciting announcements, and we're going to get the countdown to May 16th, which is going to be a big global open house event. Again, we do have Vlad that's going to be there with us. We've got a couple other things that we're cooking up behind the scenes. And it might be interesting, Nandi, we'll stay in touch because we've been talking about having like some panels there that are, like a few of the different folks, like maybe Framer is there, or maybe you're there with somebody from Wix, with somebody from whatever. And we can just talk about, that and have like a anything but Webflow room so that folks can talk and explore other kind of different platforms. So, let's take it around the horn. Colleen, any final thoughts? And we'll go to you next, Nandi.
I think, Chris was talking about, when you pulled him in just a moment ago, about basically the superpowers. And that's, I think, one of the things that's really exciting, again, about the no code space is just that it is able to give people superpowers no matter what your technical skills are. If you aren't super technical, there is a no-code tool that's out there for you. So if you're finding tool A too complicated, maybe tool B is a better fit, and maybe tool B gives you the skills and knowledge that you were then able to later on move to what had been initially too complicated for you, because you learned some concepts that you needed. So
yeah,
it's nice being able to take a look at what all is out there.
Yeah, I agree. Nandi?
Yeah, so I think the main thing that we came back to a lot of the time during the conversation is that we just need to know what tools are used for what. So if you want to do something that is more complex, then use Webflow. If you need something that is doable with Framer, then use Framer. And I also think that Framer and Webflow will be able to coexist perfectly, because I just think that maybe they are competitors because they are both like website builders. But if we think about it, I think there will be always a need for a more complex website builder that is more closer to HTML and CSS, and there will be always a need for a simpler website builder like Framer, which is more closer to Figma and therefore more usable and easier to get started for designers. So yeah, that's my final thought.
Yeah, I think that's a good one, and a good one to kind of wind down on here as I hear them cranking the hoist up. So the grinding's going to start any second now. But yeah, I think that's it. It goes back to what we've talked about week after week after week, finding the right tool for the right job. If you're just getting started, whatever tool lets you start building things on the web is the way to start, right? And that could be Framer or that could be Webflow, depending on your background, depending on your level of excitement with complexity. When I started learning Webflow, it took me 6 months of starting a project, stopping a project, going in and building some stuff, getting really frustrated, being like, oh, what is this? I can't figure out how, I just want to move the stupid thing up there to the corner. And you're like, oh, absolute, top right, hit the margin, right? Oh, but the parent container has to be relative, obviously, right? So there's all these things that you have to think about inside of Webflow that you don't have to think about in some of these other platforms. And so it depends on how you want to enter the space, what your time availability is, right? Like I had nothing but time in that moment, and I wanted to learn the closest thing to writing code that I could, which was Webflow in a visual canvas. And so it really just depends on where you're at. Brandon says it right here. Framer's a smart move for less code heavy websites and save money on hosting. We didn't even talk about the hosting. There's all sorts of other discussions to be had about, can you export the code? You can't export your, Framer code, or you can Webflow. There's obviously integrations and logic and, different things that are coming, memberships and e-commerce and subscriptions and stuff that are in, Webflow that are not currently in Framer. And so again, you just have to understand, first of all, your client, what you're trying to do, what the budget is, and what you can get done. And for some of us, that's going out and selling really big websites and really expensive websites. And for other people, that's just going out and kind of building a nice business selling that mid-tier website. And there's nothing wrong with that. And so remember that there's a lot of web to build. There's a lot of things that, like as a creator, as a digital person, as a designer, there's lots of panels or lots of paths for you to get your to monetize your creative output. So Framer's that for someone, and Webflow's that for someone else. So that's all we got. I hope we answered some of your questions. Thanks for hanging out with us on the Twitter Spaces. To everyone who chimed in, going to give you all a little heart here as we wind down. Stick with us. We always close that after the stream. And we might start doing that. I like being live on Twitter. Maybe we can, people can hang out with us backstage on Twitter and stuff before or after the stream a little bit. So anyway, thanks for hanging out with us in the comments. Isabel, let's see, Dale, thank you. Zach, what's up? Who else was in here? Versoli, thank you so much for hanging with us. Let's see, who else is in the comments? Find you.
Dale Jansen.
Dale was in there. Yeah, let's see. I don't know. Thanks for everyone who chimed in and shared your thoughts with us today. This was a great conversation. We will be back next week and every Tuesday from here on out, 12 p.m. Eastern. Bye, y'all. Okay, we're